Welcome wrestling enthusiasts and aficionados as we dive headfirst into the tumultuous world of Vince McMahon and his controversies in our Vince McMahon Iceberg. From high-profile controversies that sent shockwaves throughout the wrestling community to lesser-known incidents lurking beneath the surface, we'll navigate through the layers of scandals that have marked Vince McMahon's illustrious career. Join us for a riveting journey as we unveil the stories, legal battles, backstage drama, and harrowing allegations of the most significant man in wrestling history. This is the Vince McMahon Iceberg. Disclaimer: this video is for documentary and educational purposes only and does not promote or endorse the actions of the individuals discussed. Viewer discretion is advised. And we're starting off at the tippity top of the iceberg, Tier 6, with our first entry on Tier 6 being the Rita Chatterton Grape. Rita Chatterton was the first female referee to work for the then WWF. She claimed that while she was in a limousine with Vince McMahon pressured her to perform oral sex on him, but then when she refused this, he forced himself upon her with grape. After consulting with a lawyer, she decided not to pursue legal action against Vince McMahon at the time. She did confide in two wrestlers though, the late Andre the Giant, who she had a very good friendship with, and the enhancement talent Mario Mancini. Mario Mancini corroborated her story. In 1992, she chose to go public with it, as she told her story on the Geraldo Rivera TV show. After sharing her details of her grape on the Geraldo Rivera show, Chatterton ran into Vince McMahon at a 1993 memorial service for Andre the Giant. McMahon and his wife Linda then brought a lawsuit against Chatterton and others, claiming that she falsely accused him as part of a broader conspiracy against the WWE owner. The suit didn't go far though, with McMahon and his legal team turning their attention to other issues. Chatterton didn't pursue the matter, rather instead focusing on her career as a youth counselor. Rita Chatterton's story came back to public light in June of 2022, 30 years after she first blew the whistle of her grape. In December of 2022, Chatterton filed a lawsuit against McMahon, and McMahon settled it later that month, with his attorney stating that he maintains his innocence, but settled out of court to avoid the cost of litigation. People familiar with the matter reported that Vince McMahon gave Rita Chatterton many millions of dollars as part of the settlement. And up next we have the Owen Hart tragedy. Owen Hart was one of the most beloved men in the wrestling business, but he was taken from his family, friends, and fans as he suddenly died on the May 23, 1999 pay-per-view Over the Edge due to a stunt gone horribly wrong. As he was lowered from the rafters, he fell more than 50 feet when his safety harness malfunctioned, thus slamming his head and body on the ring post and turnbuckle. The force of this fall severed his aorta. The crowd, production crew, and Hart's fellow wrestlers were stunned and distraught after Hart was wheeled out on a gurney past the wrestlers who were waiting backstage. McMahon decided to finish the remainder of the pay-per-view. The decision to continue the pay-per-view despite a man literally dying in the middle of the ring was met with a lot of backlash, especially from Owen Hart's widow, Martha Hart, who complained that they scooped him up like a piece of garbage and they paraded wrestlers out to wrestle in a ring that had Owen's blood on it and where the boards were broken from Owen's fall and where the guys could feel the dip in the ring from where he fell. The fact that Vince McMahon didn't stop the show was truly sick. And up next we have making Trish Stratus bark like a dog. One of the most uncomfortable in-ring segments in WWE history saw Trish Stratus calling Vince McMahon to the ring after he humiliated her the previous week by having Stephanie cover her in dirty mop water. After Vince comes out, Trish surprises everyone by actually apologizing to Vince and begging him to let her make everything up to him. Vince is skeptical and wants Trish to prove to him how she's sorry. At this point, he orders her to get on her hands and knees like a dog, before insisting that she bark into the microphone. Vince then tells Trish that he's seen her on all fours before, and that if she's really sorry, she'll take off her clothes. Trish then strips down to her underwear, and Vince orders her to remove her bra too, but just before she's about to drop it, Vince stops her, and in a move that makes Vince simultaneously a face and a heel, he spares Trish further humiliation by telling her that the fans have seen enough of her. Vince covers her up with a jacket, and Trish says that he has no idea how far she'd degrade herself for the right cause, and Vince sends her back to the locker room. The whole 10-minute segment makes most fans skin crawl, and it's an embarrassing reminder of Vince's ego run amok. And up next we have Bret Screwed Bret. One of the most controversial moments in the entire history of wrestling was the Montreal Scewjob. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels having such personal issues led to Hart refusing to lose to Michaels on his final night in WWE. Vince McMahon told Bret the highly anticipated 1997 Survivor Series match would end in a DQ. However, Michaels won when putting Hart into the sharpshooter, as Vince McMahon demanded the bell ring to end the match, essentially screwing Bret Hart. The fans in attendance couldn't believe the betrayal that had taken place, and neither could Hart, who punched McMahon in the eye backstage. To make matters worse, McMahon conducted an interview after the event, saying Bret screwed Bret, proving he held absolutely no remorse about how this all unfolded. And up next we have Janel Grant, sex trafficking. In January of 2024, former WWE employee Janel Grant filed a complaint in a Connecticut federal court alleging that she was trafficked to WWE executives by Vince McMahon. Some disturbing text messages were revealed that appeared to show McMahon texting Grant in an obscene way. After texting her in May of 2020 that he controls her, McMahon allegedly forced himself on her with grape at the WWE headquarters. McMahon is also accused of sharing nude photos of her and videos of her with some of his employees. In an apparent attempt to re-sign former WWE champion Brock Lesnar, McMahon ordered Grant to send him sexualized photos and videos. Lesnar allegedly asked her to send him videos of her urinating. McMahon was able to convince Lesnar to temporarily rejoin WWE with this. The lawsuit also claims that McMahon wanted her to have sex with others, and that this desire of his was ultimately fulfilled by other WWE executives, including the former WWE head of talent relations, John Laurinaitis. McMahon would order Grant to visit Laurinaitis in hotel rooms, she claims. Additionally, McMahon named toys after other wrestlers and used them on her, and in probably one of the most disturbing things from this lawsuit, Grant also claims that during a forced three-way in 2020, McMahon defecated on her head. Ultimately, she left WWE and claims that McMahon paid her $1 million to keep quiet. All of these accusations led to Vince McMahon getting cancelled and even caused him to resign from the board of directors at WWE's parent company TKO. This basically means that Vince McMahon is essentially kicked out of WWE and has no power there at all. And now we're moving down a tier into the 5th tier, with our first entry on the 5th tier being faking his death. It would be a fair assessment to say that 2007 was a pretty bad year for Vince McMahon from a storyline perspective. On a Raw in 2007, there was a Mr. McMahon appreciation night, but things didn't go well for the chairman as most of the roster members took the opportunity to blast him rather than celebrate him. This led to a closing segment where Vinnie Mac exited the arena and got into a limousine, but the limousine shockingly exploded when he shut the door. The WWE treated Vince McMahon's death as a legitimate news story, to the point where some news outlets actually reported it as a fact. The next day, they put out a press release stating that McMahon was presumed dead and wondering about who had planted the bomb. The stunt significantly boosted interest in WWE, at least in the short term. Fans weren't quite sure what to make of it, although any sane viewer could tell that it was an angle. But then again, not every wrestling fan can be categorized as sane. So this led to speculation that Vince McMahon had actually died. WWE even scheduled a memorial episode for Vince McMahon on the Raw for June 25. However, that memorial episode never occurred. The same day it was scheduled to air, police found the bodies of Chris Benoit, his wife, and his 7-year-old son. So the WWE instead decided to air a tribute show to him, with McMahon appearing at the start of the show to admit how he had faked his death as part of a storyline. Vince McMahon would later go on to regret making a tribute show for Chris Benoit, as details came out that Chris Benoit was actually the one who killed his wife and son, and then himself. And up next we have forcing Lita to do the live celebration. The Matt Hardy, Edge and Lita scandal in professional wrestling unfolded in 2005. Matt Hardy and Lita were in a real-life relationship, but Lita had an affair with fellow wrestler Edge. Matt Hardy discovered this and publicly shared his emotional reaction, leading to a highly publicized and controversial storyline involving all three individuals in WWE. The scandal blurred the lines between fiction and reality, creating a significant buzz and drama within the wrestling community and among fans. One of the most infamous segments from the storyline was the live celebration, where Edge and Lita appeared to fornicate right in the middle of the ring, in front of thousands of fans. The segment was pitched to both Edge and Lita before the show. Lita was not too thrilled at the idea though. Lita then went to Vince McMahon and she told him that she was very uncomfortable with the plan. She said that she was told by Vince that this is what he wants, and if she didn't go through with it, then she would be fired from the company. Lita took her concerns to her real-life boyfriend, Edge, and John Cena. They both apparently went straight to Vince to try and kill the segment before it went live on TV, but both men's requests were flatly denied and they were not even able to tweak the concept, and so the live celebration had to go on. It was one of the most raunchy segments in WWE history. And up next we have firing CM Punk on his wedding day. The bitter feud between CM Punk and the WWE has been well documented. After feeling burnt out and tired from all the backstage politics, the straight-edge superstar walked out of WWE in January of 2014, and the company eventually future endeavored him later that year. However, the nature of how his termination unfolded left Punk furious and seeking legal advice. Appearing on Colt Cabana's Art of Wrestling podcast, Punk revealed that he had exchanged text messages with Triple H, telling him that they would be able to have a proper chat after he returned from his honeymoon, and Triple H didn't respond to his text. Punk then explained that on the day of his wedding, he got a FedEx in the mail and that it was his termination papers, telling him that he was fired. Vince McMahon denied that this act was done intentionally and said it was a coincidence, but Punk rejected what Vince said and he said that the package was shipped overnight and that Vince knew exactly what he was doing. And up next we have saying the N-word on live TV. There's no doubt that the WWE has pushed the limits of decency and what it can get away with throughout the years, especially in the attitude and ruthless aggression eras. It's central to the old school mentality that controversy creates cash. That said, there was one shameful moment in the past which should have been avoided entirely, since it was not only done in poor taste, but it was also extremely racist. In a backstage segment at Survivor Series 2005, Vince McMahon approached John Cena and dropped the N-word casually in conversation, within an earshot of Booker T and Shawn. Even though the segment was for comedic purposes, it faced significant backlash from the media and fans. The segment was defended by WWE, and they said it was an outlandish and satirical skit involving fictional characters, similar to that of many scripted television shows and movies. And up next we have the 2022 Hush Money scandal. 2022's biggest wrestling story kicked off on June 15 when it was reported that WWE's board of directors was using an independent law firm to investigate a $3 million settlement that Vince McMahon paid a former subordinate months earlier. It turns out that this $3 million was hush money to a paralegal that used to work at WWE. The hush money was paid to this paralegal because Vince McMahon entered into a sexual relationship with her and even passed her along to the then talent relations head, John Laurinaitis. The situation then deteriorated further from there, as it was revealed that he paid over $12 million in total as hush money to 3 other women that he sexually abused over the years. The first woman was described as a former wrestler who alleged that Vince McMahon coerced her into giving him oral and then demoted her, and ultimately declined to renew her contract in 2005 after she resisted further sexual encounters. It was reported that Vince McMahon gave this anonymous female wrestler $7.5 million in order for her to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Another woman, described as a WWE contractor, accused Vince McMahon of sexual harassment on a consistent basis, and she had evidence of nude photos that McMahon had sent to her. Vince McMahon paid this woman $1 million in 2008 to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Another woman was a former manager in the corporate sense and not the ringside sense, who had worked for Vince McMahon for 10 years before he allegedly initiated a sexual relationship with her and SA'd her as well. She was paid $1 million in 2006 to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 4, with our first entry on Tier 4 being the Royd trial in 1994. The link between roids and professional wrestling reached a turning point in the early 1990s when Vince McMahon was indicted by the US Department of Justice on illegal activity relating to anabolic roids. He was accused of not only actively encouraging his wrestlers to use them, but that he had provided access to them too and handed them out like candy. The charges against McMahon could have led to up to 11 years in prison and a $1.5 million fine. The trial took place in 1994 and lasted 18 days. Of the multiple wrestlers who testified, the only one who claimed that Vince McMahon had directed him to juice was Nails. Hulk Hogan testified that he regularly juiced and would pick up the roids at the WWE headquarters, but denied that the WWE boss had ever told him to take them or given them to him. McMahon was ultimately acquitted of the charges of conspiracy to distribute juice to his wrestlers. And up next we have constantly booking himself to date divas. Vince McMahon has been heavily criticized for constantly booking his way into romantic moments with female performers. The ladies who have had romantic moments with Vince McMahon on television include Trish Stratus, Torrie Wilson, Sable, Candice Michelle, and Stacy Keibler. Some of the most controversial segments that he booked involving these women was when he had Stacy Keibler's legs wrapped around his head when she was trying to get a job as his assistant. Vince McMahon would regularly kiss these ladies despite being married to Linda McMahon. McMahon, having complete control over the show, basically confirmed that he was the one booking his way into these moments, which made it even more controversial. And up next we have bullying Jim Ross. Jim Ross is a legend in the professional wrestling industry and a once-in-a-lifetime announcer who's also been instrumental behind the scenes. However, throughout his time in WWE, Jim Ross has been the butt of many of Vince McMahon's jokes, and he has been bullied backstage by Vince McMahon for many years. The bullying also leaked out on TV when Vince McMahon poked fun at Ross's real-life colon surgery in a WWE skit alongside a character named Dr. Heine. He also made the celebrated announcer join Vince's not-so-esteemed Kiss My Ass Club. Vince McMahon has also made fun of Jim Ross's Bell's palsy, which is a condition that causes facial muscles to paralyze for a short time. However, in 2012, on a segment on Raw, Vince McMahon crossed the line as he pulled his face and made light of JR's Bell's palsy in a poor attempt to impersonate the commentator. It was an unnecessary and harrowing moment since there was absolutely no need for McMahon to do it, yet he still chose to. Many figures from the wrestling community weren't impressed with McMahon's sick and cruel attempt at a joke and rightfully blasted him on social media. What makes this even more ironic was that this was all happening while McMahon and the WWE were promoting the Be a Star anti-bullying campaign. And up next we have Enjoys firing people. During the pandemic, the WWE took the unpopular decision to release a plethora of talent. It was a brutal and widely condemned move by the industry, especially since the company wasn't exactly in dire financial straits, but left many wrestlers without the option to find any work in a time where the world had been shut down. The ruthlessness didn't stop there though, as the WWE laid off more workers in 2021, weeks before the festive season. Vince McMahon couldn't resist the opportunity of using this to get his character over on television. During a segment with WWE superstar Austin Theory on Raw, Vince gloated about how it warmed him up to fire people over the holiday season, and many on social media thought that this was in bad taste. And up next we have workers' rights John Oliver. Stand-up comedian and political commentator John Oliver, the host of HBO's Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, took a shot at the WWE's refusal to provide its wrestlers with health insurance or workers' compensation benefits in 2019. The host claimed that Vince McMahon could get away with not providing these benefits because the wrestlers were independent contractors and not technically employees of WWE. Although the WWE wheel is made up of many important cogs, the influence of Vince McMahon is massive upon everyday decisions, including the fact that superstars must pay for healthcare out of pocket. The company, for their part, responded to the Oliver piece and stressed the importance of their talent wellness program. Still, the issue remains a controversial and hotly debated one today, with many people viewing Vince as a sly businessman who prioritizes money over people. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 3, with our first entry on Tier 3 being the Saudi Arabia deal. Vince McMahon created a strategic partnership with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabia deal has been in effect since 2014 and is currently slated to continue through 2027 and is worth a lot of money. Despite this deal bringing in a lot of revenue for WWE, it has faced significant criticism over Saudi Arabia's poor human rights record, including suppression of women's and LGBT rights, allegations of sports washing, and the assassination of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Some WWE performers have declined or were restricted from participating in the shows due to government policies. Like members of WWE's women's division were barred from performing until Crown Jewel in 2019. However, this same 2019 Crown Jewel event was very controversial, as nearly 200 wrestlers and crew were held hostage by Saudi Arabia as they tried to leave the country. This happened because the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, was furious that WWE boss Vince McMahon had pulled the plug on live feed of Crown Jewel in Saudi Arabia because WWE was owed up to $500 million for 2 shows in Saudi Arabia in 2018. This resulted in the nearly 200 wrestlers and crew being held hostage and told to sit on the tarmac for 6 hours. What made the situation even worse was that Vince McMahon got on his own private jet and left Saudi Arabia, leaving the nearly 200 wrestlers and crew to be held hostage by the Saudi Crown Prince. This just showed the disregard that Vince McMahon had for the safety of his talent. And up next we have Sable S.A. In 1996, Sable made her WWE debut, and she became well known for her roles in graphic narratives. Her reign as a top star was short-lived due to a falling out with the organization. In 1999, she abruptly left WWE, and shortly thereafter, she filed a $110 million lawsuit citing SA and unsafe working conditions. In her suits against the company, the former women's champion claimed that she was asked to compete topless against Debra McMichael on Raw but turned down the offer. She also claimed that during her 3-year run with the company, she suffered SA at the hands of Vince McMahon. During this lawsuit, Vince McMahon countersued her and she reduced the amount that she was seeking in damages, and they eventually settled out of court in August of 1999. And up next we have bullying Howard Finkel. Howard Finkel was a gentle soul essential to the fabric of Golden Age WWF. Finkel was a beloved figure integral to the success of WWF, and he was also the one to pitch the name WrestleMania. Finkel was a quirky fellow and not an alpha male type, and this left him to be bullied by Vince McMahon over the years. In a shoot interview, Paul Bearer said that Howard Finkel was subjected to hazing and pranks 24/7. Some of these pranks include him being force-fed sardines as part of a Bushwhackers vignette until he was sick, and also his car being frequently vandalized. Finkel's willingness to do anything as a good company man was also abused time and time again by Vince McMahon. And in tuxedo matches, Finkel was forced to dress down to his underwear despite his visible discomfort. And up next we have Spa Manager SA. In 2022, a woman revealed that she was SA'd by Vincent Kennedy McMahon in 2011 when she was working as a spa manager. According to her, Vince McMahon SA'd her at a 5-star resort in Southern California where she was working at the time. The woman told her husband, which led to him showing up at a WWE event with a baseball bat to look for McMahon, only to be turned away by security. When this was revealed in 2022, the victim's attorney was apparently in touch with McMahon and they settled out of court to avoid litigation, which means that Vince McMahon just paid the woman to keep quiet. And now we're moving down the iceberg into the second tier, with our first entry on the second tier being putting a gag on domestic violence. Stone Cold Steve Austin was a professional wrestler for WWE and was one of the most famous wrestlers of all time. Austin is best known for being a prominent feature of WWE's flagship TV show, Monday Night Raw, during the Attitude Era. Austin was married to Debra Marshall, who wrestled in WWE under the names Debra and Queen Debra. In 2002, Austin was arrested for beating up his then wife at their home in Texas. She told police that Austin hit her several times after an argument. The police report stated that Austin's wife had a noticeable black eye. Austin was then charged for domestic violence. He would plead no contest to the charges and would be given a $1,000 fine and 80 hours of community service. During that time, Austin filed for divorce from Debra, with the divorce being finalized in February of 2003. At the time that this was all going on, Steve Austin was arguably the biggest star in WWE, and in order for this not to get out, Vince McMahon made Austin's wife Debra sign a non-disclosure agreement so that she didn't reveal that Steve Austin had committed violence towards her. And up next we have Tanning Salon SA. During the weekend of the 2006 Royal Rumble event, Vince McMahon was in Florida, where he had a seasonal residence, and he went to a local tanning salon, Tanzabar, to refresh his tan for one of the biggest shows of the year. There, the clerk would allege in a police report that McMahon showed her nude photos of himself unprompted and then forcibly groped her. When she managed to get away, McMahon told her that he was only trying to have some fun. The story broke on the news a few days later, with Vince's wife, Linda, telling the media that the allegations were totally bizarre. And up next we have Fort God in a match. Vince McMahon proved his lack of respect towards the personal lives and beliefs of his wrestlers when he put Shawn Michaels in an angle where he had to team up with God to face himself and his son Shane at Backlash 2006 in a no disqualifications match. This match happened because the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels had overcome his personal demons and found new faith in God. After the McMahons came to the ring for this match, God makes his way down as a spotlight, backed by some stereotypical heavenly music. Vince stops him midway and changes the music for a funkier stripper tune, which is absolutely absurd. Vince then orders the referee to search God for foreign objects. The match mostly consists of Vince and Shane beating the crap out of HBK before Vince grabs the microphone and feigns watching God leave his partner to be beaten, while saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, God has left the building." After a brief comeback, Michaels is then defeated thanks to some interference from the Spirit Squad, bringing this painful angle to an end. And up next we have Covering Up a Murder. In the 1980s, Superfly Jimmy Snuka was one of the top babyfaces in the WWF. In 1983, Snuka was dating Nancy Argentino, even though he had a wife. Argentino and Snuka stayed in a motel room when WWF was in Pennsylvania. After the WWF Pennsylvania television taping, when Snuka arrived at his motel, he placed a call for an ambulance for his girlfriend, Nancy. When emergency personnel arrived at his room, she was then transported to the hospital, and there she was pronounced dead. The coroner's report stated that Argentino died of a traumatic brain injury consistent with a moving head striking a stationary object. Autopsy findings show Argentino had more than 24 cuts and bruises all over her body, and the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy wrote at the time that the case should be investigated as a homicide. Snuka was the prime suspect in this case. Just 3 weeks after Nancy's death, the case went cold after prosecutors met with Jimmy Snuka and the World Wrestling Federation's Vince McMahon in the district attorney's office law library. There's no record of what was talked about during this meeting, but in Jimmy Snuka's autobiography, he revealed that Vince McMahon had a briefcase filled with money. He then goes on to say that he doesn't remember if the money was given to the family of Nancy Argentino, but he still reiterated that he did not hurt her. The revelations that he revealed in his autobiography led to police looking into the case again, and in September of 2015, 32 years after the incident, Snuka was arrested and charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter for Argentino's death. However, the case was dismissed because Snuka was mentally unfit to stand trial, considering that he had dementia and was battling stomach cancer. 2 weeks after the case was dismissed, he died at the age of 73 in Florida. And now we're moving on to the deepest tier on the iceberg, Tier 1, with our first entry on Tier 1 being the interview of Brian Pillman's widow. Wrestling often blurs the line between reality and fiction. As a matter of fact, it isn't unusual to see events from the real world spill over into storylines on screen, yet there is still a tact and timing to everything. In the case of Vince McMahon and the WWE, ratings trump over these two considerations every single time. At the Bad Blood pay-per-view, Brian Pillman was meant to wrestle Dude Love. However, Pillman passed away in his hotel room before the event. The next night on Raw, the WWE decided to pay tribute to the wrestler. However, there was a segment that raised eyebrows. McMahon decided to interview Pillman's widow, Melanie, live on air. It was clear that the woman was grieving and still in shock about what happened the day before, being in no state to discuss the incident so soon after her husband's passing. The wrestling world was left disgusted by the WWE and McMahon's actions that night, which were nothing short of callous and cold toward the Pillman family. And up next we have the Ring Boy scandal. In 1992, Pat Patterson, Terry Garvin and Mal Phillips were accused of SA by underage ring boys. Even though these three men were accused of heinous things, Vince McMahon seemed intent on defending them. He had reason to after all, because one of the men, Pat Patterson, was a major contributor to the company's success. He was the first ever Intercontinental Champion, and the hugely successful annual Royal Rumble was Patterson's idea. It gets even worse though with Mal Phillips. He was in charge of overseeing the Ring Boys, who were mostly just local kids who would volunteer for what was a single event, after Phillips would entice them with the opportunity to see wrestling for free. During his career, Phillips was accused of SAing countless kids, and Vince McMahon knew about Phillips from 1988, as when he found out about what Phillips was doing, he fired him, but then rehired him just a few weeks later on the premise that he stopped chasing kids. The media ramped up the scrutiny on the Ring Boy scandal, which caused Vince to release all three men. Vince said that he had no knowledge of any wrongdoing, of which he was clearly lying, and he defended himself and his company vigorously, as one would expect him to do. Vince clearly didn't take these accusations towards the abuse of underage boys seriously, as soon after the public scandal calmed, McMahon rehired Patterson. The scandal resurfaced in 2021 when it was reported that one of the kids that Pat Patterson, Terry Garvin and Mal Phillips SA'd committed and his brother took to Twitter to blame Vince McMahon for covering up for child abusers. And up next we have the incest angle with Stephanie McMahon. Throughout his career, Vince McMahon has proven that he would do anything in the pursuit of what's best for business, even entertain an incest storyline. The 2006 McMahon DVD revealed that when Stephanie fell pregnant with Triple H's baby, Vince floated the idea to her that there could be an angle revolving around the child's identity, with the ultimate reveal being that Vince was the father. Naturally, Stephanie instantly vetoed it, but then Vince took it a step further with suggesting a compromise, that her brother Shane McMahon instead be the storyline father of her child. Again, Stephanie nixed it, but this just shows how certifiably insane Vince McMahon is. And now on to the deepest and darkest part of the iceberg, with the final entry being Ashley Massaro. Ashley Massaro was a professional wrestler in WWE in 2005 until 2008, and she was a former women's champion. Her ex-boyfriend Paul London accused Vince McMahon of S.A.ing Massaro on multiple occasions, and he said that she would constantly cry to him because Vince propositioned her to fly alone on a private jet with him many times. However, this was not the only despicable thing that Vince McMahon did to Ashley Massaro. During Massaro's time in the company, she was part of a 4-member group that traveled to Afghanistan, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Massaro, along with Maria Kanellis, Ron Simmons, and Jimmy Hart, traveled to the Middle East with the US Army. At the time of her trip, she became the victim of rape. After returning from the trip, she informed the WWE doctor about the incident, and the doctor told Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon then immediately called her and told her to not publicly disclose the incident. Massaro has said in interviews that she agreed because she was completely traumatized at that point, and she also said that Vince convinced her to keep quiet because if she came out with her grape, then it would ruin the relationship between WWE and the US military. This is again another instance of Vince McMahon putting money and reputation over true justice and people. She also said that Vince McMahon didn't offer any therapy or counseling of any sort, and she did not get any support from WWE with regards to her grape. She left the company soon after this incident, and in 2016, Massaro joined a class action lawsuit against WWE, alleging that the company concealed risks of injury that caused them neurological damage. In this lawsuit, Massaro also told her story of grape at a US military base during a WWE tour of Kuwait, and she went into detail about how Vince McMahon persuaded her not to speak up about this incident. The lawsuit was dismissed in 2018. This whole ordeal sent Massaro into a deep depression, and just a year after the lawsuit was dismissed, she did not show up for work at the radio station that she was working at, prompting another DJ to fill in for her. And the next morning, paramedics responded to a rescue call and discovered Massaro unresponsive in her New York home. They transported her to the hospital, and there she was pronounced dead, and it turned out that Ashley Massaro had taken her own life. Rest in peace, Ashley Massaro. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please check out our other videos, and also please like, share, comment, and subscribe. But anyway, goodbye.